So I'm looking today at differentiation in the LLC. And specifically the accommodations, modifications, and innovations fostered by the LLC to provide a safe, welcoming, inclusive learning environment. So a really important source to look at when we're looking at differentiation is the book by Carol Ann Tomlinson and Jay Tig, and it's called Integrating Differentiated Instruction. So this is a quote from the book. Differentiated instruction is about acknowledging that students learn in a variety of ways and reflecting on how you will foster an environment that has an equitable, inclusive, and differentiated approach. So let's start off um, talking about differentiated instruction tied into the LLC. As teacher librarians, we are part of the hub of the school and have the opportunity to connect with the whole community. The LLC is a learning center common to all students and staff. With the wealth of resources and technologies available, teacher librarians have the unique job of differentiating learning to support the school community. Teacher librarians, they play a huge role in making sure all students excel in their learning by scaffolding a space that is reflective of their needs. Addressing the special learning styles, strengths, intelligences, interests, needs, and abilities of every learner is part of a role as an educator. So, in terms of differentiating instruction and understanding by design, connecting kids to meaningful content is the role that all educators play. And we as teacher librarians play a prominent role in how we acquire and make sense of this content. In the book that I mentioned earlier, they break it down into four categories. And this is Kara Ann Tomlinson and Jay Mateague. First is content, and content is what students learn in the materials that they represent that. Second is process, and those are activities through which students make sense of key ideas using the essential skills. Product, how students demonstrate and extend what they understand and do as a result of a span of learning. And learning environment, the classroom conditions that set the tone and expectations of learning. So let me go into more detail about each and apply to the LLC. So in terms of content, the teacher librarian identifies content to be taught and provides resources to support the learning. So some ways that they can differentiate this learning are what teacher librarians could do is compile resources and sources that challenge and activate prior knowledge. Making sure resources are accessible and meaningful to a range of abilities. So that involves building diverse collections that reflect and empower school demographics. Because it's very important that students see their own identities and voices in the material that they are are going through. It also content involves exposing students to bias and unbiased resources. And so it's so important that students be able to be critical thinkers. It gives students opportunities to evaluate sources. And as teacher librarians, we have to make sure that we're mindful that students are resource forms at various levels of difficulty are available to support content in all subject areas. So we got to be able to, teach at where they are. So examples of materials in order to increase student engagement and make it easier for students to um, engage with the material or fiction, nonfiction, articles, podcasts, newspapers, databases, websites, multimedia, etc. So especially not just written form, but audio, visual, and more rich media. Supporting students to be powerful digital citizens is so important. And so as a teacher librarian, we need to teach them digital citizenship. And as Jennifer Castle-Todd mentioned, move them to using social media and be leaders in social media. Utilizing the community as experts in learning. And there's so many great sources out there that, especially now that we're in the time of COVID, it's actually easier to access um, experts now, especially when we're using platforms like Google Meet. Empowering students to consider multiple perspectives and lenses. And this is especially important given that, society has become polarized in many ways, and to reduce this polarization, it's important that students understand different viewpoints. Now let's move on to process. And what is process? Process the process of acquiring and teaching content, which is an important part of learning. So how do a teacher, librarian scaffold and approach to differentiate instruction is crucial to successful learning. And I'm going to go through ways using process they can do this. One is having inquiry-based approach, and which is very open-ended and low risk. And earlier in this course, we've gone very much into discussing the inquiry-based approach, and the advantages are included. And it's so much about having students doing topics that they're passionate about, and that they're likely to be more engaged about, and that reflects their voices being heard, inquiry-based approach. And earlier we talked about Trevor McKenzie and the different types of inquiry based on how the readiness of the student. We can also, in terms of process, co-create graphic organizers and other charts that prompt and activate prior knowledge. Process also involves real-world challenges to promote critical and higher order thinking. And that's so important, making connections to self and the world at large. Because authentic learning is so important. Because students have to see how they can use it in their lives, that it's not something theoretical that they're not never going to use. And when they see that it's something that's needed and that will help them, they're again more likely to engage in the material. We need to provide opportunities for collaborative learning for students. Ways we can do that are like discussion groups, clubs, initiatives, group work, think, pair, share, elbow partner, etc. So these are examples. Allow rich opportunities for approaches to learning to support different intelligences, kinesthetic, interpersonal. So it's important that we're having different approaches, especially if we reflect on Gardner's multiple intelligence, and assessment strategies that support students become advocates of their own learning. And it's important think about the gradual release of responsibility so that students are able to take a greater and greater role as their readiness increases, and we're always there as teacher librarians to provide scaffolding that they need. Now, in terms of product, the LLC has so many resources to support students learning in so many areas. The teacher librarian can provide opportunities to differentiate the product by showing students creative and diverse ways of displaying their knowledge and learnings, like, for example, digital presentations, models, posters, interactive games, plays, etc. And that's what I did last semester is game-based learning. I feel is a very effective tool. So having students do like simulations, I did that in business, and so it's much more realistic. And when you're having an interactive game, students are getting instantaneous feedback, which is more in tune with the realities they face, since so many of our students are gamers. Supporting students and making connections to their learning beyond the school walls. So, example letters or to the Prime Minister, community activism initiatives, etc. And especially with technology too, it's so much easier to do online petitions and also using Twitter to do a Twitter chat and 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 use, as Jennifer Casatad I mentioned earlier, um, students can be active leaders in student in social media using, as I mentioned earlier, the Twitter chats and also contacting organizations through social media. Co-creating learning goals and success criteria to reflect in consolidating learning. And we went through earlier about assessment practices and how important it is for students to be involved in their own self-assessment. And when they're involved in doing success criteria in co-constructing like rubrics, for example, they are better able to reflect what they need to do in order to be successful. Sharing student exemplars for students to reflect and see growth and unpack learning. And I find when students look at exemplars, they they see beyond what they are normally do, because they see much greater possibilities, and a lot of times exemplars can be inspiring in addition to, I mean, the assessment piece where students, you can show them, okay, what is a level 4 exemplar, what's a level 3. So it also helps in the assessment and evaluation piece too. Now, in terms of a learning environment, the space plays a vital role in differentiating instruction for teacher librarians. This is especially relevant as this is a space that the whole school interacts with. So how do teacher librarians foster a space that is conducive to diverse learning? Below are some ways that teacher librarians can use the space to set intention. So one is making sure your space is welcoming and warm. So there's quiet spaces for small group work or to take a pause and cool down. There's room for body breaks, and there's visual cues to support diverse readers. Interest centers that encourage students to explore topics of particular interest to them. Anxiety reduced seating like wiggly stools, seat cushions, weighted blankets. Alternative modes of acquiring important information like graphic organizers, charts, tables, etc. So these So I like to conclude that with the learning environment.